Everybody, welcome. Wave if you can hear me. Okay, very good. We have a special guest with us tonight, Jacob Cooper. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. For those of you who are new to these free Zoom calls, I don't want to assume that you're familiar with my work, so I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Rob Schwartz, and I'm the author of 3 books, the premise of which is that we plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we're born, before we incarnate. And in the books, I go through all the major challenges of life in the Earth School one by one, and in case study format, examine why somebody wanted before they were born to have that very difficult experience. So the intentions are to help people awaken, by which I mean come into some understanding that you're more than the body, more than your thoughts, more than your feelings, that you are in fact an eternal, infinite soul. Another intention is to help people see the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose of their biggest challenges. And a third intention is to help people heal from those challenges. The understanding of the deeper spiritual purpose and meaning is a large part of the healing. Now, normally in these free evenings, which we do every 2 or 3 months, I start by going through the 5 main reasons why we plan challenges before we're born. Going to skip that because I don't want to take away time from Jacob tonight. Jacob is somebody who I'm just getting to know, but I'd heard a lot of good things about him for a while now. And then he approached me and said, would you be interested in doing something together? And I thought, sure, why not? That sounds like fun. So I invited him to join me for this free evening and introduce him to all of you. So, Jacob, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Rob, and staff for all your support in coordinating this wonderful event together. And thank you all, for investing your time and coming out here tonight, in a world where there's a lot of questions and some might have uncertainty. The hope with Rob and I is that some of you are able to hold on to some of the pieces of information, to what I say generate the hope and the faith and the knowing past some of the pain. But a little bit about myself. Professionally, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work both in private practice as well as, out of all things, psychiatric hospital as well. I'm also a 2-time author of The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder and Lifetime and Life After Breath, which are 2 books really based on my own near-death experience. And um, I consider myself a reflection of the living embodiment that we do not die. I and many other of near-death experiencers, to me, represent that understanding. And I also, like Rob, am a certified hypnotherapist. So, my reason for, interviewing Rob on my personal podcast, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, and for coordinating this as well, was the amount of symmetry that Rob and I have with our work, in working and utilizing hypnosis to really regress clients. I do a lot of past life regression, and a lot of between life, regression stuff. And so I know Rob does as well. So there's a lot of parallels and symmetry. And I think tonight would be a great way to give some of our own professional and personal perspectives onto why we're here, who are we, and why do we come here, and did we indeed choose this lifetime? And so I have a unique vantage point of like Rob, having a personal training in hypnosis, where working with clients is my strengthening pad to really understand this as a hard truth, but also through my own direct experience and my near-death experience and subsequent out-of-body experience that occurred, 2 decades later. But beyond that, like Rob, I'm a public presenter and I talk throughout, different countries in the world. And my hope is for people to just remember that they are, like Rob said, that we are so much more than we could ever imagine. And so direct experiences have the capacity to transform a belief, a faith into knowing. And my hope is really to give over everything that and I'm sure Rob has the same sentiments that we both experience in our transformative experience, to give that just as a reflection of what each and every one of us has inside of our own inner knowing. And so hopefully tonight is just a way to potentially validate your own beliefs. But of course, we don't come from a place of um, persuasion or pushing our own agendas. I think we kind of plant the seeds based off of our own professional and personal experiences, and we give the autonomy up to each and every one of you as to what you feel is valid, true, evidential, and what might, maybe at this moment not best serve your highest and greatest good. So it is obviously my complete honor to do this, and I hope that we're going to have fun tonight, and it's going to be very informative and uplifting as a way to better understand ourselves in the greater context of greater realities.
So Jacob, you raised a very interesting question there. You posed the question, who are we really? Why don't we start by considering that? And I'll start by sharing a spiritually transformative experience I had that directly addressed that question. And then maybe you could share one or more of your experiences as well. Some of you may have heard this story, so if you have, please just bear with me. But back in the year 2003, before I had started at all on the path that I'm still on to this day, I was working in the corporate world, self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different kinds of corporate writing. I did not enjoy that work at all, and I really had an existential crisis at that point in my life. I knew that I had come to Earth to do something else, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to figure out what it was. And then the universe really staged an intervention, and several quite important things happened. But the most important was a spiritually transformative experience that I had during the summer of 2003. And what happened there is that I had been home alone in my apartment in Chicago, where I lived at the time, just having an average work day. And in the middle of the afternoon, I decided to take a break and go for a walk. So I was walking down the sidewalk when all of a sudden, I had this experience in which every time I saw another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person washed over me. I could call it divine love. I could call it transcendent love. Those are the words in English that get closest to this feeling, but there actually are no words that even begin to describe this kind of love. I could also say that it was not a personal kind of love. It couldn't be because I didn't know any of the people I was looking at. But this love was so pure and so strong. And I remember the experience so clearly because the first person I saw when this started was a cab driver. He was just sitting behind the wheel of his cab waiting for a customer to come along. And I looked at this man who, of course, was a total stranger to me and just felt this pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for him. And then I looked up and there was a man's barber shop on the corner. I looked through the window and I saw the barber cutting the customer's hair. Again, two total strangers, but as I looked at them, there again was this pure, divine, transcendent love. And then I turned around and there was a young woman, a mother, pushing an infant in a stroller down the sidewalk. And as I looked at them, there again was this just pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. Everywhere I looked, every time I saw another person, this kind of love for that person flowed over me and through me. Now, I had never heard of anything like this or read about anything like this, but I understood as it was happening, I understood intuitively that it was my soul saying to me, this love is who you really are. This is your true nature. I got that message loud and clear. What I didn't know at the time was why this was happening. That actually became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had looked at a number of people's pre-birth plans for my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And what I found in every case, no exceptions, the pre-birth plan was always based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love for every person involved. And that was true even when quote unquote negative events and negative roles were being scripted for people. It was true regardless of what was being planned. So it would be accurate to say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. And that changed everything. It changed my understanding of who and what I am. It changed my understanding of who and what everybody else is. It changed my understanding of the nature of the universe and what it is that we're doing here in the Earth School. And I think, there are many reasons why we plan big challenges for ourselves. But if you distill them down, they all have a common denominator. And the common denominator is that we're learning lessons in how to more freely and fully give and receive love. And this makes sense given the experience I had walking down the street that day, because the soul is love. That was what I experienced. And so the soul wants to have the experience of giving and receiving love fully and freely while embodied on the physical plane. So that's my answer to the question, who and what are we? And Jacob, I'll be interested to hear your answer.
Wow. Well, Rob, I know you shared this on my podcast, but each time that I hear you speak of this incredible transformative experience, I'm sure, like many viewers, it's incredibly moving, enlightening, and informing. But this is a very significant question that, Rob and I have spoke on, because I have a belief of a belief that beliefs are not a thing. To me, they are everything. And there's a tremendous correlationship of our beliefs and how we live our life. And so many of our beliefs are based off, what others have told us to who we are. We're given a name, a gender, an age, a job, and we start to believe that is all that we are and all that is. But like Rob, 10 years later, 10 years earlier, I'm sorry, in 1993, I know he had his in 2003, 10 years apart in the summer time around 1993 was when I had my own near-death experience. And certainly this is well chronicled in both of my books and a lot of interviews. So for time's sake, it's hard to get into the full story of it. But certainly, what I learned from my near-death experience, I was just the young age of 3 years old when I had mine. So you could imagine that, it's certainly a thought-provocative, and just different perspective from a near-death experience angle. But for myself, what I really understood was many things, but one thing was this life was not random. That having my near-death experience, I knew was something within my own soul's planning. But I wasn't just here to just be a kid and work up to pay the bills one day and just kind of live this material existence. But rather, in my DNA and all of our DNAs, is that we are indeed infinite spiritual beings having these human experiences, but there's an infinite intelligence that I connected to in my near death experience. It just reminded me the notion that we are not here randomly, that there is so much more behind the scenes that sometimes we may not be aware of, that is with us, even if we have our own proverbial blinders on. But my near death experience awakened me to spirit guides, angels. I was able to see the creative force of all of life that flows from itself, which many would call the universe, or some would call God. If you want to say England, you want to say UK, it's kind of describing the same places, but different vernaculars. But for myself, it just reminded me that I am eternal. So who am I is an eternal, infinite being. And sometimes to really find yourself, you have to lose yourself. And I know Rob had, certainly, potential, identity, and there was a bit of a crash or uncertainty. And all the spiritual masters, tend to have it. Buddha had a life of material wealth, and for him, that just wasn't something that was adding up. And he was able to get the fruit on the tree by going on a limb and trying a different path and leaving it all behind. So the near-death experience allowed me to just let go of all these things that I thought were myself. Now, when you're a kid, the biggest thing that you're prescribed is just to be normal. And so coming out of my near-death experience, certainly I was completely transformed and I had this deepened connection to higher awareness, but I just knew the world around me wasn't connecting to the same Wi-Fi bars that I was. And so that was a very big challenge. And so what I did was basically ascribe to what was told to me was just to be normal. So the near-death experience is always there, but I tried to just bury it like a beach ball in the water. But it just would always come back to me. And I had just a lot of pre-birth memories of the life between this life, before this life, as well as a lot of higher connectivity to higher source that would come to me without trying. But around 20 years later was when I had my own STE and OBE. And that really came from just looking at all these things that I thought that I was, which many would refer to the ego, my body, my age, my name, all these things that I had so much pressure on and just a heaviness of my identity. And I looked at all these things that I took so seriously and I started laughing hysterically. And it wasn't just laughing as if like a very superficial light laugh. This was laughter in every point of my spiritual and physical being. And when I laughed, every little thing was just kind of squeezed out. And then I just saw myself leaving my body, and it was emotional. I was able to just, like Rob, walk in the streets and feel an ocean in my own heart. And throughout the days, I would try to take a tissue to wipe my forehead off, thinking it had tons of water in it, when really just my eyeball was just bulging. And it was profound, but it reminded me that no one is ordinary. We all are extraordinary. We just merely have to, as Michelangelo says, chip away at the masterpiece within and remove all these things that we think that we are to get to our truth. And so, for myself, after having this OBE, I was able to see one strand of energy that connected almost everyone and everything. And this reminded me of what I now know is called the we consciousness, which is the interconnectedness of all sentient, living, and spiritual, non-living things. Not, I would say not living, but not physical things, and the one philo that we are. And so the question is who we are. Certainly, reference from my near-death experience and out-of-body experience is we are infinite, universal consciousness here just to remember ourselves and to express that point of recollection. And sometimes to really know yourself, like I said before, you have to let go of all these things that we held on to. And it's a big vulnerability to leave some of that stuff behind. But wow, is it incredibly exhilarating, euphoric, and life altering to be walking in parallel and harmony with who you really are and not what you are or what you've been told. And so, my hope is some of you could start to continue to listen to that inner voice and to be more importantly empowered on your journeys to walk in uniformity with your own infinite spiritual self and all of our inhabitants here.
Jacob, let's talk a little more about pre-birth planning, which, as you know, is a subject of great interest to me. And I'm curious if you have information about why you planned before you were born to do the work you're doing now. I'll start by sharing a little bit about my own pre-birth planning. It's my understanding that a lot of the planning for this lifetime for me was based on two particular past lives in which the same thing happened. One was in the ancient civilization of Atlantis, and apparently I was an Atlantean citizen who was opposed to the atrocities the Atlantean government was carrying out. Those of you familiar with Atlantis, they had very advanced technology related to crystals and genetic engineering, and it was used for not light-filled purposes, we could say. So I was opposed to this, but I didn't have the courage to speak out against it. And then apparently the same thing happened in another lifetime in Nazi Germany. I was a German citizen who was opposed to what the Nazis were doing, but I lacked the courage to speak against it or act in opposition to it. So when I was doing the planning for this lifetime, I felt that I wanted to work on courageously speaking my truth. And that was one of the reasons, and there are others, but this was one of the main reasons why I plan to do the work that I'm doing in this lifetime. Pre-birth planning is not yet a mainstream concept. I think it's gradually moving in that direction, and it's moved a long way since I started back in 2003. But it's not a mainstream idea yet, and so there is some courage involved in putting forth this kind of truth. I will say, on a humorous note, I don't think it's as difficult as being a German citizen who is resisting the Nazi government. It's
Hmm.
not quite at that level, but it's the same kind of thing, learning to speak one's truth courageously, but also with loving kindness at the same time. So that was one of my motivations. And Jacob, I wonder if you have any of that information in regard to your pre-birth planning.
Yeah, personally, um, in my own near-death experience, I had a condition called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which led to my own suffocation. And so I lost all the capacity to breathe. I fully suffocated. And from losing, when you're having an NDE like I did, it could feel like you're drowning, as if there is absolutely nothing to hold on to. And so that period was very traumatizing, which I do believe was a after effect gift that there was post traumatic growth as well as recollection, full blown recollection of my NDE, which trauma could have as a psychotherapist, a dissociative protective factor, or it could be clear as crystal. In my case, that was the case in my near death experience. But I completely suffocated and there was just nothing to hold on to. And once I surrendered and let go of my own struggle and my own resisting against what was, I surrendered to what I referred to. And even in my own faith that I was raised in, and Rob is also a part of the Jewish tradition calls spirit, it's translated as the wind or the breath of God. And so when I lost all the ability to breathe and all of life force itself, I surrendered to this great oasis of the breath of eternity. And that really allowed me to just, continue and to heal and to move forward. In my own near-death experience, I had lifetimes that I share in my books, but I do believe one particular lifetime, to be a detective that I am within making sense of all this, that I do believe has the closest tie of correlationship with my near-death experience, was my last lifetime, which has been evidentially read by several different intuitives prior to ever me saying a word publicly about my own near death experience or writing books or doing interviews. But this is a lifetime in which, as a therapist, I don't use the word commit suicide. I don't criminalize mental health conditions, much like I wouldn't criminalize diabetes or heart, blood, heart attack or anything like that. But this was a lifetime in which, yes, I chose to, um, end my suffering, my life at the time. And when I did this, I obviously remembered a great healing transformation. I wasn't condemned. I wouldn't be here today if I was in the internal condemnations of fires. I think I'm still here. Some days I ask myself that, but I saw the clear parallels in many ways in my own near-death experience and that when a sense of my professional work, and working in high levels of acuity with clients as a way, to give back from that place that I was, but also just the parallels of my near-death experience where I was faced with the position of once again feeling out of sorts, nothing to hold on to, much like I felt like in my own life in which I took my own life. My back was against the wall. I saw no hope in sight. Now I was just in this state of paralysis. And my near death experience was a real soul lesson of mine to just remember the value of surrendering and to remember who you are. And so, as a therapist, with plenty of my clients, we work on this notion of riding the wave that no matter how bad things are, no storm lasts forever. But also, the clear understanding of my near death experience that reminded me that in the grand picture of things, no matter what you're faced with, all is well, was well, will be well, which is certainly thought provocative if we have went through the abyss of the human experience. But I certainly experienced that understanding as well as the parallels of that last left lifetime and my own work and my own near-death experience. So I certainly believe that from completion we begin, and the work that we do, that we're doing now, usually doesn't just start, in this lifetime. There is an association of other lifetimes that leads itself to where we are today. So I don't know if you I agree with that notion, Rob, but that's certainly something that I experienced firsthand of the clear parallels, the parallel lives that we do live, and how we're here to generate a degree of meaning and transformation to some of our darkest moments that we have. And indeed, that is a part of the Earth school that we're on. Here is growth, evolution, and finding meaning as well as purpose, which I view as the God realization. And have my near-death experience just reminded me the value of giving back what I was given when I wasn't able to hold on to anything. I was shown eternal life, and that's my goal with people who cross my path now, is to give back what I was given. And so when people are out of sorts, I try to allow them to tap into that same degree of awareness, catharsis, and euphoria in even those darkest moments. And I experienced that firsthand, that it's possible to have an incredible transformation just in moments by simply the power of surrendering and letting go to a greater force and beauty inside of you that transcends even the heaviest and darkest of pains that you may feel.
Let's talk about what's going on in the world these days, by which I mean ascension. And this is actually one of the submitted questions. Somebody wrote and said, what is the reason for our ascension? Is there a desired endpoint? I'll start by sharing my understanding of what ascension is. And this is just my understanding. And then Jacob, maybe you can share your understanding with everybody. So my understanding is that billions and billions of years ago, in terms of linear time, the souls who are incarnate on planet Earth now got together and we said to each other, we would like to make a unique contribution to the Godhead. We would like to create and bring back to the Godhead an experience that has never happened before, that will be informative and expansive to all beings in existence. And so we gave a lot of thought to what this might be. What could we create that had never been done before? And we came up with the idea of experiencing separation or individuality. So our natural state is one of oneness or unity consciousness. When we're back on the other side, we still have an individual nature, but at the same time, we know ourselves to be one with God and with all of existence, all beings in existence. And this seems paradoxical to the human brain, but that is the nature of life on the other side. So we said, what would it be like if we created situations, circumstances in which we no longer perceived ourselves as one with God and all other beings, we perceived ourselves just as unique, separated individuals. And when we put forward this idea, as I understand it, much more highly evolved beings, those who love and guide us, said, essentially, we do not advise you to go forward with this plan. We foresee great suffering. We believe that this is not a good idea. And then what followed was a lot of discussion, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Is this a good idea? Is it not? Should we move forward with it? Should we not? And in the end, those who love and guide us stuck to their position and said, we do not advise you to do this. We foresee great suffering. And we essentially said, understood, but we've got this. We want to move forward with this. We can do it. And it will make a unique contribution to the universe. And then the experience of separation began. If you're not familiar with the term separation, it means what I just described, that you perceive yourself to be an individual, a being separate from all other beings. Now, separation is actually an illusion, even here on the earth plane. You appear to be separate only due to the limitations of the five senses. For the average person, the five senses don't pick up the fact that you can't actually be separate from the one, but you can create the illusion of separation. So we did that, and over eons of time, as I understand it, The ego mind, which came into being when separation was created, the ego mind grew and grew and became more and more prominent, and we became mostly identified with the ego mind. Initially, the purpose of the ego was to keep the physical body alive on the physical plane. When we first started incarnating in bodies on the physical plane, the veil was much thinner than it is now, as I understand it, and you still had direct perception of the light realms. And because those realms are so filled with beauty and majesty and light and love, a lot of the focus was still on the non-physical, even though we were now in body on a physical plane. And because the focus was still on the non-physical, people weren't paying attention. They were having accidents, and the accidents led to the death of the physical body. So the ego was created to monitor the external environment, looking for threats, looking for danger in order to keep the physical body alive. It was a very elemental, primitive consciousness, and it still is, but it grew in prominence over the eons of time as people made more and more fear-based decisions. Fear lowered the vibration of the incarnating souls, and the vibration went down and went down and went down, and led to the kind of suffering that was foreseen by those who love and guide us. And so at a soul level, we've essentially said, we now feel complete with this experience, and we would like to reverse it. And that's my understanding of what ascension is. It's the reversal of the separation. And for those who stay in body during the ascension, it's happening in a very physical way. So as I understand it, we've already moved from the third dimension or third density into fourth density, and we're on our way to fifth density, which is a vibration of unconditional love and oneness consciousness. So we're essentially going home, but while staying in a physical body. That, as I understand it, is the purpose and the endpoint of ascension. And Jacob, I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that is something certainly that I have tuned into and have read throughout much of the masters and spiritual teachers throughout time. And I think when people are tapping into something uniformly, regardless of age, culture, civilization, throughout different parts of the world, there usually is something to it. To myself, I would say that we could learn a lot from our own universe and nature and our own solar system. If you look at our Earth right now, there's certainly a lot of talks on the continuity of the planet and taking care of it. But our Earth is certainly dependent on, the sun and other forces at hand. But as human beings, much like the Earth, sometimes we forget our relationship with the greater cosmos and the impact of cause and effect and acting our own self-serving reasons. And so I think for people to understand ascension is to really understand how we found the Earth. Right now, there was a point in time where there was an identity of the Earth that was flat, and that's all that people knew. And that's what they saw. But through challenging that prism of awareness, they're able to find that was not the case, that there was other realities at hand. And I think for us right now, there's certainly a lot of information and people elevating. And certainly with that, there's a lot of muck that comes to the surface. Much like a therapist, I'll work with a client from, let's say, a trauma perspective, and they'll feel some degree of pain and maybe potential suffering, but all that stuff has to come out as a part of the healing process. And I think right now, practically speaking, is we're dealing with a lot of stuff from the higher realms as well as our own stuff that's being brought up into our own awareness, and how we engage with that and relate to that is a part of one's ability to have awareness and flexibility and the adaptability to change. And so I think right now the ascension process is, there's people who are holding on to their old ways and are having all these new ideas, and there's a lot of barriers to accepting new ways of living and viewing, and it's a vulnerability, to really enter a different world. But much like I said, to find that new world, you have to let go of that new. I mean, I know Eckhart Tolle, and I believe in the New Earth, and one of the first couple of pages in it, mentioned how in some ways animals to a degree, and I'm not, trying to insult human beings, but they may be more adaptable in alignment with the laws of nature than we are. And why I say that is when there's an animal that has, let's say, a famine or its own sustenance that's threatened, they don't just sit there and just complain or get angry or retaliate. They adapt, they migrate. And I think right now we've been repeating a lot of patterns that clearly aren't serving us throughout time. And it's through this awareness to say, hey, look, let's take a step back and say, we've evolved technologically, but spiritually, have we really evolved collectively? Depending on what angle that you use, but certainly some patterns are, continuing their own trajectory. And I think for people to change, it's a part of this ascension is awareness, but also the flexibility and adaptability to do something different. And, that's certainly my hope with the ascension. But to me, the ascension process is simply remembering who you are and who we are, which is the interconnectivity of all that we have and the interdependence of the ability into the connection of the light source that we have to allow the planet to heal. Much like the earth, like I said, needs the sun to continue. I think for us, we need this light to continue this ascension process and to broaden it. And I do believe that the part of the ascension, if each person remembered their own light, we could really shine that on all the darkness that, may come into our own way, and we could work through it a lot easier versus walking around it or having this darkness overtake light itself. And so I think to me, the ascension process is just simply by remembering who we are, tapping into these lights, and each individual taking their own onus of responsibility to do that as a point not of power or control, but a point of cooperation and cohesion. And that's is certainly our ability to thrive and survive is our ability to be interdependent and to remember who we are. And that's a part of the ascension. But one's ability to engage with life depends on their own levels of consciousness. And so I think as we remember who we are and we've seen different, difficult things in front of us, we tap into what I really understand. One of my good friends talks about this. He talks about the eye of the hurricane when there's a lot going on around us and a lot of calamity and uncertainty and mayhem, all the masters have tapped into something greater than a lot of the challenges in front of them. And that has been their GPS navigational force. And so to me, this ascension is dependent on not our ability to live outside in, but to live inside out and to navigate our lives from the point of awareness, not being enslaved by our own, leaf in the water, so to speak, but to generate a current from within.
So you used the word remembering a number of times, and that is something that's very, very important. I think we're all in the process of remembering who and what we really are. And that was one of the things that I wanted to get across in the books that I wrote. I think that we live in a time period in which the average person very often feels small, weak, helpless, powerless, insignificant. And really, nothing could be further from the truth. And remembering who and what you really are means remembering that you are the incredibly courageous soul who planned before you were born to experience the most difficult experiences you've had. And you did this for your own healing and growth and expansion, and also in service to many, many other beings. So it's my understanding that Earth is the most difficult school, the most difficult planet in our universe on which to have an incarnation. And it takes tremendous courage to come here. Many beings know that there would be great value in coming here. Not all of them have the courage to do it. But everybody who's here tonight, obviously, you did have the courage to do it. And remembering who you are means recognizing the incredible courage you showed in creating a pre-birth plan, and even greater courage in executing the pre-birth plan now that you're here in body. Jacob, what could you say to people to help them remember? If somebody wants to remember who and what they really are, how do they go about doing that?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. Well, I certainly think part of it is like you mentioned, there's a courageousness to it. But also, it's kind of like that scene from Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams is hugging, Matt Damon, and he's coming up to the patient. He's saying it's really not your fault. And I think for people, it's just to remember that, all these forms of identity that you've held on to that have, you know, just shaped your life is not your fault. A lot of people around you have put on their own levels of consciousness and awareness onto you, and for you to hold on to that is not your fault. We've all been disempowered to a degree from day one. When we were born, we weren't told, hey, you have all the answers, you know everything. We were taught, hey, this is the way to live. And a lot of families have a degree of a self-replication of the self, and very little is taught to kids to just tell me what you know, what's inside of you. So it's a regurgitated trajectory that plenty are on, in our society. But I think it's to let go of the guilt, the responsibility that it's not your fault. I say to really allow people to remember who we are is the ability just simply to let go. I think the more that we let go, the more that our awareness grows, which is so much different than our culture. In our culture, we're taught the more that we carry, the more that we have, in terms of houses and cars, in income, the more that we are. So it's an incongruence with all these things that we've been told. And we've been told that greatness is not inside of you, it's in something or someone else, that we at our core, are not good enough. In order to be something, we must need to do something. And I think really the key is to be empowered and to be able to be flexible, adaptable, to reframe, that notion, and also to just understand, is the way that I'm viewing myself, serving me in the best possible way, or is there another way? And also the notion is, what if I had this all wrong the whole time? What if I had God wrong the whole time? What if I had my own identity, my awareness? What if it's possible that all of this is not factually true? And so it is hard. I think for people, we're kind of programmed this, so hard that it's very hard to reframe it. But it is indeed possible for change to happen. Certainly, with a lot of people that I notice in my practice, there's a shakeup period that often comes with this. Some might call that an existential crisis. It may be a traumatic experience, grief or loss. From your perspective, an STE and NDE. While those are common, place that those can be transformative and allow people to remember who they are, it's not dependent on that. And in my understanding and my near-death experience, I just remembered my own brain being the last kind of physical thing that I was able to hold on to. And once my brain was deprived of oxygen and I felt a large crack in my own brain. And so that's a saying, when my brain cracked open, that's when God came in. And that literally happened to me, was then everything opened up. And why do I bring up the brain? Because to me, as a mental health professional and someone who's had a near-death experience, I could tell you that the brain is so pivotal in our life. It doesn't produce consciousness, but to me, it filters it. And one way to really cleanse the brain and really allow yourself to remember who you are. Certainly, there's a buzzword that's thrown around with it that I personally have a hard time with, but people say mindfulness or meditation. But to me, I think when you just kind of close your eyes and get sacred and get quiet, the more you could hear. And from doing that, the more that you could really see and experience. And I have people who meditate who just know when they do meditate that they're more than their thoughts, they're more than their emotions, they're more than all these inherited things that they've held on to. And there's just kind of this sacred eternal observer that they connect to when they do meditate. And that's great, and I say, wow, that's amazing. I had to go through amazing trauma in my own near death experience to have this. But I think people have parallel experiences when they just allow the mind to open up like a parachute. That's how it needs to work. And that allows people to remember who they are. And it could be gradual, it could be very quick, but just simply allowing yourself to let go of all those things that may be best to leave behind. Much like in our life, we know we're not like hanging on playgrounds all day and playing on mats in kindergarten. We evolve physically, in this lifetime. And so I think for us, it's just being able to be comfortable with change and to embrace change and what that can do in our lives. I hope that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And, something that the Spirit shared with me in the research that I did for my books, the channeling sessions, they were always talking about how when we come behind the veil in order to incarnate in the Earth School, then we forget who and what we really are. And then we remember over the course of a lifetime. The process of forgetting and then remembering leads to a much more profound self-knowing than would otherwise be possible.
Mhm.
And this is sort of a crude analogy, but I think it'll make the point. If you think about what would happen if after this Zoom call is over tonight, let's say you walk outside and God forbid, a big tree branch falls on your head, knocks you unconscious. And when you come to, you have total amnesia. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you are. You don't recognize anybody who's around you. Well, what would happen from that point forward? Well, most likely what would happen is that all your family and friends, all those who love you, would rally around you and they would undertake what essentially amounts to a massive re-education project. They would put in front of you every email you'd ever received or sent, every letter you had ever written or received, all kinds of photos. They would put this mountain of information in front of you to help you remember who you really are. Now, you, lacking memory, would pay very, very close attention to every little detail in all of this information. So by the time this re-education project was over, in some sense, you would have a better idea of who you are than you do right now. And that's, again, it's a crude analogy, but it makes the point that by forgetting and then remembering over the course of an incarnation, you eventually end up with a much more profound self-knowing than would have been possible had you not forgotten and then remembered. There's an interesting question that I want to go to in the chat box. Someone is asking, I believe we have many plans that we follow while incarnated. How much does will play a role in changing circumstances or changing the plan? Those of you who are familiar with my work, you know that my wife is a channel. Liesl channel is a collective, a group consciousness that we affectionately call the beings of light, or the BOL. And they have shared with us an analogy that I think is very, very helpful. And I want to share it with all of you now. They talk about how we all have many, many pre-birth plans before we come into body. And they use the analogy of a stack of sheets of paper. If you have a stack of sheets of paper in front of you, and if each sheet represents a complete set of pre-birth plans, then everybody who's incarnate on Earth has their own stack of sheets of paper. That's how many pre-birth plans you actually have. It's essentially quantum pre-birth planning. Now, which sheet you're actually living on in any given moment depends upon your frequency, your vibration. So the sheets that are at the top of your individual stack, those are the highest vibrational pre-birth plans. Those are the plans where most of the growth and learning is done through love, peace, and joy, and not so much through pain and suffering. The beings of light tell us that the sheets at the bottom of the stack are just the opposite. That's where most of the learning is done through pain and suffering, and not so much through love, peace, and joy. So which sheet you're on in your individual stack depends upon your frequency. And that essentially means how loving are you? The more loving you are, the higher your vibration, you move up in the stack of sheets of paper. The less loving you are, you move down in frequency, you move down in your individual stack of sheets of paper. So to the question which asks, what is the role of free will? It's very, very important, vitally important. You can use your free will to move up or down in that stack of sheets of paper. The way to do this, the easiest way, in my opinion, whenever you have to make a decision of any kind, no matter how big or how small, ask yourself the following question. What would love with a capital L do now? And whatever the answer to that question is, do that. The more often you can do that, the more consistently you can do that, the more you will move up in your stack of sheets of paper, And the more that you're learning will come through love, peace, and joy, not so much through pain and suffering.
I
Jacob,
love
any
that.
particular thoughts about that?
I firmly love that. Yeah, what would be the point of being here if we didn't have free will, right? It would just be like given all the answers on a test and not, taking the test. I think free will is a part of how we grow, certainly. So we have that part of ourselves. It's not all, in stone. But I experienced in my near-death experience a premonition that I had of the work that I would be doing, the people that I would be helping, and that's why I really decided to turn down heaven to stay. Most near-death experiencers are told, "Hey, it's not your time." I would say probably 60 to 70% usually have that lack of autonomy. For myself, that autonomy was provided, and I stayed just to really allow people to remember who they are, what they're connected to, and that's why I am here in this body today. But I was when I made the decision to stay, I was left with undeniable um, regret that I did that. And then my guides came into me and I said, how do I know that that I'll be able to be of support to others, to help others? How do I know that this will all happen? And my guide just left me with this last message that I'll never forget, which is the power of how we think, how we vibrate, and how that could work in parallel or even transcend what was originally planned. And that was left with me firsthand, that when you're able to really trust the process, trust that greater intelligence is beyond this pre-birth planning than even our own doubts, our own fears, our own sadness about it, then we could surrender to this intelligence and we could walk in parallel. So I found that within this life, the value of a knowing, or at least faith, is very important. And it's not the absence of doubt, but the ability to walk with it, but to lean into and tap into something greater than our own doubts on things. And I think when we're able to really let go of the self-aggrandizing belief systems that we know more than than God, than our own plans, then we're able to really, to be in trust and to work in parallel. So I think really, yes, you nailed it. That love is so essential with how we walk in our path. Because to me, when I experience, God or the universe in my near-death experience, it wasn't um, some, just abusive parent or condemning principal of a school. It was an unconditional source of love. And if we take ourselves and squeeze each part of ourselves out, who we are is infinite love connected to its infinite creator. That is who we are. We are just a divine spark of that eternal love to me. And so remembering who we are, remembering that we are love, that we are eternal love, allows us to walk, in parallel with the life that we were meant to live. Now, what's important too is to be empowered. I think if we walk with a small sense of self, when we constantly doubt ourselves and we don't think that the impossible is possible, and that's our beliefs, then we may just live, just kind of like a limited trajectory. But if we think that with walking in parallel with spirit, that anything is possible, and when you come from a place of service, or you come from a place of trying to make this world a better place, your life really does ascend to new rungs of the ladder, as I call it. In my second book, The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder, which ironically, my near-death experience happened in a ladder in a playground on a slide. So you think of the different rungs going from the lower up into the higher, that biblical Jacob had. To me, I think that's the same thing in our life. And I think really the more we vibrate, the more in harmony we are with our own creative source. But again, it's about applying all that we know. I mean, I could learn about New York and live in, Washington State all my life, but until I'm actually there, I don't really understand it as much. And I think we all have our experiences to really apply our own wisdom. And when we apply our own wisdom and what we know, we become it. It becomes it elevates us. It's not a separation of something we intellectually know. It becomes us, and we are able to elevate through the application of all that we know. And that's the beauty of incarnating in these lives is losing that, forgetting that, remembering that, and applying it, and we become it.
That was beautifully put. I want to take a couple of minutes now to let all of you know about some courses that I have going on. And then Jacob will talk about some things he's up to. and then we'll take questions. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to put it in the chat box now. So, as many of you know, I'm a hypnotist, and I specialize in something called a between life soul regression, or BLSR for short. This, to my way of thinking, is the most powerful and effective way to find out what you planned before you were born. So what happens in a BLSR, it's a long session, takes about 2 hours, and you can do it either privately or as part of a group workshop. It works equally well either way. We start with some preliminary steps to help you relax physically and then mentally, and then I guide you into a past life. It's almost always a past life that had a big impact on the plans for the current lifetime, or is in some way thematically related to the current lifetime. You experience several different scenes in the past life, the last of which is the death scene. The portion of your consciousness that is having that experience leaves the body in the death scene and crosses back over to the other side, which I know sounds a little bit ominous, but there's actually nothing to it. It's very safe and gentle. When you get back to the other side, most likely you'll be greeted by one of your spirit guides, although it could be a master, an angel, a loved one. Whoever greets you, you talk with them about why you were shown that past life and what's important to know about it, how it's relevant to your current lifetime. And then whoever you're speaking with will take you to what is called your council of elders. Everybody has their own council. These are the very wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution. And they know literally everything about you, everything about the plans for your current life, and everything about every past incarnation you've had, every non-physical experience you've had, literally everything about you. When you get to your council, I prompt you to ask a long series of questions that covers all the major areas of your life. Now, if you're doing it as a private session, you would put your questions on the intake form, and that's what I work from during the session. If you're doing it as part of a group workshop, I have a standardized set of questions, but they are so comprehensive, they'll cover all the major areas of everybody's life. And so even though those in the group are asking the same questions, they're receiving individualized responses from their council. So we ask your council, why did you plan all the major challenges you've had, the major relationships? What are the themes of this incarnation? What did you come here to learn, to do? How are you doing? How can you better fulfill your pre-birth plans? Essentially, any question you could possibly ask about this incarnation. So by the time the process is over, you should have a much better idea of what you planned, why, how you're doing, and how you can better fulfill your plans. And we have 2 BLSR workshops coming up. Stephanie, maybe you can put the links in the chat box. There's one on September 8th and another one on October 6th. So please feel free to register for those. And we have a coupon code for you, which is Soul Plan 15. SOULPLAN, then the numbers 1 and 5. All the letters are capitals, Soul Plan 15. That will give you 15% off if you register before midnight on August 9th. And then somebody asked in the chat box about the shift course. Starting tomorrow at 7 p.m. US Eastern Time, Lisa and I are reteaching a course we did for Shift a couple of years ago about awakening to the life you planned before you were born. So this course is all about gaining insight into what did you plan and why and how are you doing and so forth. It essentially asks the same questions the BLSR asks, but we go about answering it in different ways. For example, one of the things I learned in my research of pre-birth planning is that when souls plan big challenges for themselves, a lot of the motivation comes from a desire to cultivate and express certain qualities that are very important to the soul. I call these qualities divine virtues. So in one of the Shift Course modules, we'll go through a divine virtues exercise that will help you determine which qualities or virtues you're working on in this lifetime. From a pre-birth planning perspective, you viewed your biggest challenges as providing both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate the virtues. The virtues are things like compassion, patience, empathy, unconditional love, faith, and so forth. We work with a list of about 28 that are the ones that I have seen the most in my study of pre-birth planning. And once you know which virtues you're working on, that's really valuable information to have, because then any time in the future that a new challenge comes along, instead of feeling victimized or just not seeing any deeper meaning, you can say to yourself, okay, I know that I'm in this incarnation to deepen in whatever it might be, compassion, faith, and trust. Knowing that, how do I work with this new challenge to cultivate and express those particular virtues? So it gets at the underlying lessons in a much more conscious and much direct manner than is usually available. Liesel is co-teaching the shift course with me. There will be a lot of guided meditations from the beings of light that will in one way or another help you to access information about your pre-birth plan. It should be a lot of fun. They record every episode, so if you can't attend in real time, you can watch it at your convenience. And Stephanie, do we have a link for the shift course? There
I
it is.
just added it too.
Okay. All right.
To learn
So
more.
that's what I've got coming up. And Jacob, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, well, those sound like great offerings and opportunities. So I would strongly suggest looking at some of Rob's courses. And I love your work. I will be in Helping Parents Heal in a couple weeks in Phoenix, Arizona. And that's a wonderful organization for parents as well as siblings who have had lost, loved ones crossover, which we view as shining parents or shining siblings, shining light parents or shining light siblings. We try to take away bereaved parents or bereaved siblings, as we know that there's an eternal bond, when loss, and death comes. So I have that going on. I'm going to be next year, and it's on my website at the Omega Institute for kind of like an afterlife type weekend. I was just in Lilydale Assembly presenting as well. I have a lot of online sessions if people are interested individually, and if there's enough interest, we could certainly get a group going. I know I'm going to be in Ridgefield, Connecticut in a couple of weeks. It's on my website at a place called the Angel Cooperative for people in the Northeast area. And then I'll be giving a book signing as well as a past life regression group session. For myself, I absolutely love past life regression from an angle of a psychotherapist, as I do believe, science believes that if you look at anything closely enough, there's an explanation. And I think spirituality is the same kind of way, or psychology is the same kind of way to a degree. If you look at anything closely enough, there's a reason. And past life is a great way to work in parallel with what I do as a counselor to maybe uncover some of the things that we may not understand from a surface level that we could really tap into the higher mind. But also, speaking throughout the years of my near-death experience, a lot of people would say to me, Jacob, how do I have a near-death experience? And they wanted a self-induced near-death experience, and I just had to obviously caution that. My job is to is quite the antithetical opposite of that, is to preserve life, not to expedite crossing over. And I thought to myself, wow, doing meditation regression is a great way for people to remember who they are, why they're here, much like Rob said, but also at the very least to remember that they don't die. Because within regression therapy, we know that we live many lives, we've had many deaths, and there's a continuity. And it's my hope that that could allow people to remember their eternity. And certainly as a therapist, there's a big correlation with the degree of the belief in an afterlife, our own eternity, and how we deal with loss or grief. So when that becomes a direct experience, that is a beautiful thing to see with my clients, as well as, past life regression. I know Rob could attest to us, isn't just stigmatized where you're working on maybe some phobias that you might have or traumas that you don't understand. It's not just pathologized, it could also awaken and broaden some of your greater gifts. And I've had a lot of my own clients as well. I've seen other clients, expand their own intuitive gifts and their own connection to higher source. So it is just a beautiful exercise. And I'm just privileged to be alive at this time where it's allowed, it's accepted, and certainly, I thank people like Rob and people like Dr. Brian Weiss who have been groundbreaking and daring to really get this out in the public because it is a great gift to people that are able to just receive that degree of remembrance of who they are, what they're connected to, and why they're here. So do check out my website as well as my two books up. And I also have a podcast with weekly conversations with guests that's now going to be on mindbodyspirit.fm with Diane Ray, formerly with Hay House Radio. So that's could be pretty exciting in terms of bringing guests on and great material and just getting the good word out there.